If Scott's ready? Yep. Okay, the Mendocino County Board of Retirement meeting for November 4th, 2025 is called to order at 8:34. Roll call, please, Judy.
Mr. Kelly is absent. Ms. Cavanis, also absent. Mr. Haschak?
Here.
Mr. Cromer?
Here.
Mr. Shoemaker? Absent. Ms. Harris? Here. Mr. Swope? Absent. Ms. Cubison? Here. And Mr. Land?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and I guess we start off, is there any public expression for any items that are not on the agenda?
There does not appear to be any public comment.
Okay, that'll move us into item 1, proclamation honoring Quincy Cromer for his service to the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association. Oh, you know what? I forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I skipped an item. So we're going to back up here, and this is the last time I need to say this. Trustee Cromer, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Gladly. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So that'll take us once again to item 1, which is the proclamation honoring Quincy Cromer for his service to the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association Board of Retirement. And I'm going to read this proclamation. It's a long proclamation. It could be a lot longer, as we all know, because he's done an awful lot of good for this board. Okay. Proclamation of the Mendocino County Board of Retirement honoring Quincy Cromer for his service to the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association. Whereas Quincy Cromer has been a well-respected and admired Board of Retirement trustee who has represented safety members after being elected for 2 terms since March of 2019, serving as board chair from December of 2021 through November of 2023. Whereas Quincy's dedication was apparent as he routinely attended meetings while his law enforcement duties became increasingly difficult and time-consuming, successfully promoting from sheriff's sergeant to sheriff's lieutenant to sheriff's captain during his time with McSarah. Whereas Quincy has served as a truly confident model trustee who has always put fiduciary responsibilities at the forefront of his duties and shown unwavering commitment to the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association and its members. Whereas Quincy has been an integral part of the Retirement Board's decisions regarding operational, financial, and investment issues facing McSarah and has proved to be a leader and a true asset to the board. Whereas Quincy's honesty, pleasant demeanor, and collegiality have always been appreciated by fellow trustees and McSarah staff. His attention to detail and polished appearance, often in uniform or tailored suit, made him the best dressed trustee at most meetings.
I have a problem with that.
Objection noted. And whereas Quincy's valued contributions to McSarah included the adoption of Article 8.4 regarding separate account divisions for community property interest, completion of the Historical Benefits Correction Project, and receipt of an agreeable Internal Revenue Service compliance statement, the addition of infrastructure to McSarah's investment portfolio, reduction in amortization, the base layer of the unfunded actuary accrued liability, and adoption of a 5-year information technology master plan, among other things. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Mendocino County Board of Retirement recognizes and honors Quincy Cromer for his years of service, expressing their sincerest gratitude for his dedication to McSarah, its Board of Retirement, and members. Quincy is truly wished every joy life has to offer, continued success in his career, and success in all future endeavors. He will be missed. So now we have board discussion on this item.
You can't go.
Well, yeah, we've exercised every possible avenue to keep him, to retain him, that I know of. Of course, you know, Quincy, you've been an inspiration to me personally, You were involved in recruiting me and for this. I appreciate that very much. The way you conduct yourself with this board has been, an absolute model, and I really do appreciate it. The sheriff's is lucky to have you. The sheriff's office is lucky to have you there, and I'll be watching from afar as you progress even further in your career.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just add, I really appreciate your logical approach to the issues. And when I'm just kind of learning this stuff, but I always look at you as like, you just approach it very logically and like, what's in it for him, Sarah, and what's the best way of, dealing with this situation. That's really it's a great attribute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quincy. I agree with most of what Alex said and everything in the proclamation.
I put my thoughts in writing.
I'll read it later. It was a difficult decision. I hope you guys all understand that. And if I didn't have such a demanding normal job, I think you all know me well enough to know that if I do something, I do it to the maximum ability that I can. And I feel like I've been juggling some of those and barely treading water. So I will actively recruit a replacement. I know it hasn't worked so far, but for those that are watching this meeting, if you're a safety tier member, then please reach out to me or Executive Director Doris Rentschler, and we will tell you what this is all about. But I just want to express my gratitude to everybody that is serving on this board and everybody has served on this board. It is a very demanding position, and I don't think you all get appreciated enough, because I know the amount of work that I put in on a monthly basis, and I'm positive there are people on this board that put in more work than I could, and it's a very underappreciated position, but it's extremely important. So thank you all for what you do and continue to do.
Are there any further?
No, I speak for a lot of people like Alan as well. Thank you very much for all of your contributions to the meetings that we've been part of. It's been an honor to work with you in service to Sarah.
Is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Member requests separate action on a specific item. Does anybody wish to pull any items from the consent agenda today? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved by unanimous consent. That brings us to the Actuarial Evaluation Study, dated June 30, 2025. Siegel, we have all three of our actuary people here: Todd Towser, Andy Young, and Daniel Siblick.
All right, good morning, members of the board. We're glad to be with you this morning. My name is Todd Towser, as mentioned, joined by Andy Young and Dan Siblick. Before we get started on the actuarial evaluation, just a point of order. We announced a few months ago now that Mr. Andy Young has planned his retirement for early 2026. It's February 2026. He's been working on public plans in California for more than 40 years. And we think he knows public plans in California better than anyone else in existence. So it is a big loss to have him go, but we've had the pleasure of working with him and learning from him for a long time. And so as part of that, we've been planning a transition to make sure that we don't lose anything in terms of the services that we provide to our clients. And so if you're wondering why we have three people here, that's because Dan Siblick, who's been working on public plans also for quite a while now, is going to be joining our team to help out. The rest of the team that does the work on MSARA is exactly the same, so it's only Andy that's changing due to his retirement. We pleaded with him not to go, similar to what it sounded like over here, but he just laughed at us and continued to plan his retirement anyway. So yeah, we're doing all that we can to download all the knowledge we can and the institutional knowledge that he has. And Andy, I'll turn it over to you if you want to say anything.
Yeah, just a few quick words. Thank you, board, for putting a trust in me for the last 15 years. That's not counting the time we serve as your auditing actuary. I think to be the messenger is very difficult. As you know, we have a good plan that we offer to the members of the county. And when you first hire us, we assist staff and council and whatnot in making sure that all the benefits are correctly valued in our systems. And there were some hiccups that we identify. I think you stand firmly behind us. We don't think that we make you very popular among your stakeholders at the county, for example, and our members, because there were a lot of good reasons why we make those recommendations. Contribution rate did go up. So I know that a lot of sacrifices have to be made by our members as well as by the employer to make everything happen. So thank you so much for your support during the last 15 years. I wish I was 20 years younger and I would rejoin Todd and Dan in their work, but I very much appreciate the time that you have invested in me and making me a better consultant all these years. Thank you so much.
So I'll also ask Dan to introduce himself, give a little background on where he comes from.
Sure. I also, like Andy, want to be 20 years younger. So.
I got you all, so.
Todd said, my name is Dan Sidlick. I've been with Siegel for 14 years. I've been working on defined benefit plans for over 30 years. I started off in corporate plans, then worked on multi-employer. My focus has been public plans for the last decade. I've worked on or work on statewide, counties, authorities, public safety plans, Native American plans, large plans that closed in on 1 million actives, plans that were small that had 5 actives, funded different ways through fixed rates, through actuarial determined contributions, statutory contributions. I write some articles for NC PERS. I've done a few. I've just participated last week at their conference, their fall conference down in Fort Lauderdale. I was a speaker there. So I try to be active in the community. Todd and I are also working on a paper that we're hoping to release soon on mandating Social Security on the public sector. So I cannot replace Andy. No one can, but and those are big shoes to fill. But I'm happy to be at your service. So that's a little background on me. But if you ever have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
So hearing no questions on that, we'll jump into the actuarial valuation. So this is the June 30th, 2025 actuarial valuation. And so you'll be controlling the slides. Thank you. We're pleased to report, before we dive into details, it's a good year. We had good investment return. The other experience for the plan was decent as well. And so we'll go into the details on that to dive into exactly what's happened to the plan in the last year. But not bury the lead, it is certainly we're going in the right direction in the funding of the plan, and that's important. Before we get started on the details, I do want to remind the board that starting on page 7 of the actuarial valuation, there's something called valuation highlights. And so it goes through about 3 to 4 pages of all of the primary results of the valuation. So if you want a 10-minute read on exactly what's happened in the valuation, that is the best place to go for a summary. And also within those valuation highlights, you'll see various places where we reference pages across the valuation where you can go and get more details if you want to look at something in more detail, more particular. So I do recommend always starting with the valuation highlights when you're looking at the actuarial valuation. With that, I'm going to cover the funding valuation while Andy keeps me honest over here in 4 different parts. So I'm going to start with just generally funded ratio, what's happened to the plan. Then I'm going to look into the plan experience, so look at the investment return, other kinds of plan experience, what's happened to the unfunded liability. Third, I'm going to look at then turning it over to contribution rates. What does that mean for our contribution rates? And then finally, we're going to look a little bit more detail on the asset smoothing side and see what we have in deferred gains and losses, what might show up in the future. So that's the progression, if you will, of discussing the actuarial valuation. So with that, let's first turn to page 38. We are presenting directly from the valuation report. Hopefully helps you get a little bit more familiar with the report itself. But if you have any questions as we go along the way, please feel free to interrupt me. That's not a problem at all. So page 38, it just shows very generally how we've come as a plan. Of course, we have 2 different colors here. One is the market value of assets. That's in green. That's exactly as the investments are reported. That jumps around a bit more for funded ratio. And then we have in this orange color, the orange triangles, a valuation value of assets. So that's the smooth value of assets being used to determine the funded ratio. We use 5 years of asset smoothing. That just means when we have investment gains and losses, we recognize them over a 5-year period of time instead of all at once. and that allows for some of the ups and downs to offset each other. You can see that very clearly in 2021, where we had a really strong investment year and the market value of assets jumped up, but instead of all of a sudden, shooting down contribution rates and thinking everything was great, the smooth value took its time to go up, and sure enough, in the next year, we had a poor investment year and the market value came back down. So that smooth value helped really smooth out exactly what it's trying to do in that kind of situation when you have ups and downs over 2 consecutive years. And then more broadly speaking on this graph, you could see, of course, start with the global financial crisis. Our funded ratio came down quite a bit. So did every other plan in the United States. We're not alone in that. Then we had a period of about 10 years where you don't really see much improvement. A lot of that has to do with actuarial assumptions. This board was very proactive about adopting more conservative, but we feel more accurate, forward-looking actuarial assumptions, both related to mortality, also related to the investment return. A lot of hard choices there that were made that makes the measurement of liability higher when you have more conservative assumptions, but it really sets up the plan better for the long term. And then in the last few years, you've seen that we actually are starting to trend back upwards in the funded ratio, including in this current valuation. So we do think we have a good foundation for the funding of the plan, and now we're also heading in the right direction in terms of actual ratio. So I think that's a good just overview and background to think about in the funding of our plan. That concludes section 1, just the general overview. Any questions on that before I jump into specifics? Okay, and I'm going to ask us to turn to, let's see, page 24 of the valuation. So going into experience, I wanted to start with investment return. You can see the roller coaster ride here in green, which is the market value investment return over time, another clear example of why we like to do asset smoothing. And once we get to 2024, 2025, we've settled down a little bit in the last few years, but we've had solid returns. And so looking back at 2024, if you can see the numbers, the actuarial rate, the smooth value before we adjusted the contingency reserve was right at 7%. And then we had an adjustment that we talked about last year to bring in the contingency reserve. So we did have a gain overall at that 8.05 level. And then this year, we had a market return, a strong return of 12%. And that led to, again, even though we're smoothing it in, so we're not recognizing it all at once, it's over a 5-year period of time, that led to another gain in the actuarial valuation. We had an actuarial return of 7.61. Keep in mind our expected return is 6.5, so definitely above our expected return, which created another gain in this valuation. So that's helpful, tailwinds for us on the funding on the actuarial side, not just in the current valuation, but the fact that we've deferred some of those gains into future valuations. So we have a bit of a buffer on the investment side going into future valuation results. So now if we flip forward to 29, here we're going to talk about the experience in total. So across all different categories, not just investments. So at the beginning of this page, we have what do we expect to happen without looking at the actual experience? Just before we get into that, what did we expect? So we had unfunded liability at the beginning of the year, about $250 million. And we had normal cost, our members earning their next year of service as the cost associated with that. We have interest on the unfunded liability, that's line 4. But then we have contributions coming in from the employers and the members that help offset those things. And in fact, they more than offset it, and we hope to pay down some principal as well, not just the interest on the unfunded liability. So at the end of the year, we expected the unfunded liability to decrease from that 248 down to 237, about an $11 million decrease. So you can see that all at the top. That was expected values. And then we say, okay, well, what actually happened during the course of the year? So that's the 6 on this page with all the letters by it. We have 6A. Well, investment return was strong, better than expected even after smoothing. So we had about an $8 million decrease on the unfunded liability due to investments. On B, we always have a 1-year delay between when we set the contributions and when we actually implement the contributions. So that results in a bit of a lag. And when contributions go up, it makes a small loss. When contributions go down, it makes a small gain. So here you get a small loss related to the contribution delay. Then we had an interesting result here, a contribution gain due to higher than expected increase in total payroll. We're going to deal with that in a couple different layers. You'll see it again in D. But here we had more contributions coming into the plan because we had more members than we expected coming into the plan. But at the same time, you look at D, and salary increases higher than expected means they have higher expected benefits, which means higher liabilities that we assess. So you see a loss of the $4.7 million due to higher salary increases. But on the COLA side, we actually had COLAs coming in lower than expected, which resulted in a gain of $3 million. So a lot of offsetting features here. We have more net experience of just everything else put together in F. But the net result is that we had a $2.6 million unfunded liability decrease even after what we expected. So we expected about an $11 million decrease from the contributions coming in. Now we have about a $13.5 million unfunded liability increase, all things said and done. So that's the plan experience in a nutshell. Did I miss anything here, Andy?
No. I think the only thing I would add is the board has a policy to review all the actuarial assumptions every 3 years. So we'll be doing that at the early part of next year. So questions may come up as to, well, what about the investment return, as Todd has indicated? Right now, we have a 6.5% return. Even though we don't use the past experience to set the future investment return assumptions, but all the metrics that we're looking at, we're pointing in the right direction. 5 years return, 10 years return, 15 years return, we're all in excess of the 6.5%. So I think we have high hope, not making any promises at this point, that we will be able to sustain the 6.5% assumption. So, which arguably you can say, is the kind of one of the lower investment return assumptions for good reason. I think this board is, everything is relative, right? It's a very conservative board. You want the actuary to come in and bring you good news more often than bad news. So this is one of those instances where we have good news on the investment return.
I'll let the record show that Andy said we'll be bringing back the experience studies, so maybe we're working on that retirement piece for next year. But so that's the second of the four, is to cover the unfunded liability experience, the changes that we've seen. Now I'm going to move to page 32, which is switching over to the employer contribution rate. So here, the employer contribution rate, a lot of these are similar to what we saw on the unfunded liability side. So I won't cover them all in detail, but we will at least make sure we have an understanding of this page. To start with, the aggregate employer contribution rate was 41.82 last year. We saw a decrease of over 1.5%. So now the aggregate is 40.27. So that's the overall the good news for the plan. And then there's a couple of things on here that really help to decrease it over time. Particularly, we have the investment return, which is 2C, which you can see reduced the contribution rate by 64 basis points. So that really helped to bring it down over time. And then the other really big one, I mentioned earlier in E that you see here, is that we had higher salary increases than expected. And so that brings in a bit more liability. That resulted in a 38 basis point increase on the contribution rate. However, because we have more payroll now, we get to spread the legacy unfunded liability payments over more payroll. So we get to spread it out over more people. That allows us to lower the contribution rate. So you see that here in 2F. It says amortizing the prior year's unfunded liability over than a larger than expected payroll. And that really brought down the contribution rate because we're spreading this out over a greater total payroll, 1.14%. So that's the big difference here on the contribution side that you don't really see on the liability side. And so altogether on the net here, we have a decrease of 1.55%, leading down to 40.27 aggregate rate. And of course, I should mention that here you're just seeing an aggregate rate, but when you have safety, when you have general membership, there's a big difference. The safety moves around a lot more than the general does. And you'll see that when you look at the details of the contribution rates. The safety in this case went down by more than you would have seen on the general side. All right, moving on to page 33. Just real quick on the member side, we have some very minor changes. Just based on member demographic changes, we did see their contribution rate tick upwards, but very small amount, 0.04%. So from 10.24 to 10.28 in aggregate. So almost the same rate as before, but just a slight tick upwards. All right, hearing no questions on all of that, the final piece, final two pieces of the valuation presentation. First, I'm going to look at slide 22 now, which is looking at asset smoothing in a little more detail to see what we have to come in terms of recognizing asset gains and losses. Just by way of reminder, last year when we did the valuation, the board approved, we had the actuarial value of assets and the market value of assets right on top of one another, almost identical. And yet the way that we were going to recognize gains and losses in the future years was going to be a good year and a bad year, a good year, a bad year. It was very volatile. It was bouncing up and down, even though the net result was almost identical. So the board just approved, based on the actuary's recommendation, to just uniformly recognize that's very small net gain over the next 4 years. So we did that in last year's valuation. And so now with the results that we have this year, we have new deferred gains, investment gains to the plan. We're going to be recognizing that over the next 4 years, including this one. And so you can see the box in the middle of the page here. If you're looking at 2A, B, and C, it's all kind of united into one because we united those layers together. But if we look at 2D, we had an expected investment return of $46 million. We actually received investments of $85 million, quite a bit higher than expected, strong investment year. So we have a gain of that $40 million, which is the third column, and we're recognizing 20% of that now. We have 80% left to come. So we've got about $31 million of this year's gain that we're going to still be recognizing in the future. And if you go down to the very bottom of the page in the footnote, it talks about how we'll be recognizing that in future years. You can see, because we made it very smooth last year, it's very level over the next 4 years, where you recognize $7, maybe $8 million in all of the next 4 valuations. That's, of course, before any future experience, which will be added to this. But we're currently in a solid spot where we have deferred gains is going to help for the next few valuation years. All right, the last thing I want to mention.
Todd,
please.
I have a question on that. So for this fiscal year or future years here, we sort of have a good understanding of how gains and losses would be smoothed out by Siegel. But in the case where we maybe had another good year, where we're again deferring 10, 20 million, what sort of schedule might we expect in the future? Could we expect that these prior years, as that big negative 22-year rolls off and now we've got another really strong year, could we expect that Siegel might recommend combining those years into larger actuarial gains? Or in the case where it was negative, we would expect the 5-year smoothing to just layer on as it has been. But in the case of multiple years of higher returns, what sort of process would we kind of expect from Siegel?
Yeah, good question. So we did have that bad year, right, the 2022 year. We actually covered that last year when we combined the bases and rolled them all out in one. So now if you look, there's not a single year that has a negative return on it. We just have positive returns over the next 5 years. And one of the key aspects of asset smoothing is, and this is even in the actuarial standards of practice, we don't treat bad years differently than we treat good years, or we don't treat consecutive bad years differently than we treat consecutive good years. So for example, we've already dealt with the volatility part. And now if we have a good year followed by another good year, we are going to stick to board policy and recognize it over 5 years, because there certainly will come a time when we have another bad year. I mean, great if for the rest of our career we only have good investment years, but we don't think that's going to happen. And so the asset smoothing is there for exactly that. You recognize some of the gain in the current year and you push some out for the next few years so that when that bad year comes, you've already got deferred gains lined up to help offset it. And it works really nicely to minimize funding ratio volatility and contribution rate volatility. So that's really the point of asset smoothing. So we'd love to see another gain next year and build up another buffer and see that recognized over the following 5 years. But we would stick to the plan. We wouldn't shorten it or anything like that.
And the only time there's really this recommendation of combining previous year layers is when the assets are close to the actuarially smoothed value, right?
Exactly. So we actually state when this is appropriate in the board's funding policy. And it's basically 2 things. One is when the actuarial value and the market value are very close together on net terms. But 2 is when looking out in the recognition, you might have $200 million gain 1 year or $20 million gain next year, $10 million loss, and it's bouncing around, even though the net result is about 0. We say, well, that's silly. Why are we going to be jumping up and down when the net result is about 0? So let's just spread it out evenly and keep that net result 0. So we don't even change the net recognition at all. It's just helping the gains and losses to offset one another more actively, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
And good market run-ups can lead to, I mean, on the chart we showed, we didn't have 2001, 2, and 3, but that was 3 years in a row after the big market run-up of negative S&P 500 returns. It can happen, like we lose it from our memory, but big run-ups can be followed by downturns. So something to remember there.
Alex, quick question. Does CalPERS still smooth 17 years?
CalPERS does a strange funding policy. It's called direct rate smoothing.
Okay.
And they directly smooth in rates instead of contribution rates instead of asset returns, but they do it over, it's a 20-year level dollar now?
Something like that. Yeah.
I think it's a 20-year level dollar amortization.
Why?
So, why do they do that? It's very comparable to a 20-year amortization. But they thought that if they directly smoothen the rate, then they can get rid of having a market value and an actuarial value of assets. They wanted to get rid of having reports have two different value of assets. And so the goal at the time was to make it more transparent. I don't think over time it actually did. I think it made it less transparent. So I like having to be able to identify exactly what we're doing, how it's being smoothed in over time, and what the result is, where you can see it in clear steps.
Thanks.
Okay, the last thing I wanted to touch on briefly is way down in the valuation report towards the back. It's page 77. And actually just before 77, which we don't have to look at, is a table of amortization layers. So you can see all the particular layers of what sources of unfunded liability or sources of gains that we've had over time and how they're being amortized over time. You can look at that at your leisure, nice bedtime reading material. But if you look at 77, we've summarized this in graphical form. So here we're showing the balances of all sources of unfunded liability and how they're going to be paid off over time. And we've categorized them by particular source. So first we have the large restart layer. That was that amortization that started even before Siegel was the actuary here at Mendocino. And so that's a significant portion of our total unfunded liability. And because it was over such a long period of time, we still are dealing with that. I know at one point the board took action to shorten that a bit, and that was very helpful in the ongoing funding of the plan, was to get that to a more reasonable spot. So that's the red restart layer, very clear in this picture. The green is gains and losses. So in any given year, investment gains and losses, demographic gains and losses. You have some of those above zero, which is new unfunded liability. Some of those are actually below zero, meaning they're actually gains to the plan like we had this year. And so those largely, if you look at the green on both sides, largely offset one another. You have some good years, you have some bad years, but neither one is too dominant in that sense. But you do have blue bars. Those are assumption changes. That does not offset one another. Those have gone towards being more conservative and recognizing that the future economic and demographic environment is not the same as it was 20 years ago. I mean, that's just a simple truth. And so we've had proactive assumption changes. You can see those here. So this is how we're paying off all those layers over time. That black line is the net result. Why it's not at the top of the page is because those green gains offset it to some degree. So anything below zero helps bring that black line down. So that's the payment plan. That's the unfunded liability balance, how we're going to pay it off over time. On the next page is the actual payments related to this. And once again, you can see the red restart layer. That one is really dominating the payments. When that's finally paid off, you'll see payments drop dramatically for our plan. Once we get there, that's really dominating why payments are so high currently on the unfunded liability side. But we do have some payments related to the assumption changes. And then again, we have the gains and losses that go in both directions. So this is really, I think, clearly helps show a future state. Of course, we will have more gains and losses to come, but I do think we're in a much stronger foundation in terms of the assumption changes. As Andy said, it doesn't seem like we have the same kind of pressure we used to have to keep lowering that expected return. So I think assumption changes will be more stable for us going for future. That doesn't mean there'll be no assumption changes, but it should mean they're much less significant than the assumption changes we've seen in the past. So that part, I think, is much better positioned for our plan. We've just got to get through this red restart layer, and then things will start looking a lot better. And at that time, as we get closer to that, we might even discuss ways that you can do some risk mitigation in terms of how you lower contribution rates over time. No doubt you're going to want to lower contribution rates over time, but there are different ways that you could do that instead of just having a massive cliff all in one year. We're not there yet, so we have time to talk about it, but just worth mentioning that that's something that some other plans are working through right now as they have contribution rate cliffs coming up much faster. So something to put on the board's mind for the horizon, so to speak. But with that, this is the last page I wanted to present in the actuarial valuation, so happy to answer any questions you may have.
I guess I have one page. I know that the board always likes Eagle to bring to you the good news this year as well as the not so great news, right? Headwinds that we might be running into. So if I may ask Robert to turn to page 17 of the report. I think this is not a surprise. I think we are one of the more mature systems among all the county retirement systems that Seagull work on, and even including the ones that we do not work on. And as Todd has indicated early on, this year we get a lot of good news because we have more payrolls coming in reported by the employers of the county, so as to allow us to amortize our UAL over a larger payroll base. So it makes the mortgage payment, the UAL, a little bit smaller than it would have been otherwise. But if you ask Seagull, okay, well, are we looking at systems like Mendocino where the number of active employees, have they keep pace with what they were 10 years ago? Are they going up at other places? I think this is very noteworthy that if you look at the number of actives we have in the plan today is 1,094. So back as recent as 10 years ago, we have more active employees. So to be quite candid with you, we have a few systems that have employers anyway, they have to cut number of actives because of budget concerns and whatnot. And a lot of the other counties, they have since hired back the active employees. So I think we have two forces that are acting that we have to deal with. Number one is the employer, because of the budget and other considerations, they have to reduce the number of headcount, which is very important because anytime we have unfunded liability, even the existing unfunded liability, we have to spread them over the existing workforce, the payroll. So we would be helped if we were to have more active and therefore bigger payroll, and that did not happen to our plan during the last 10 years. And that matched up with the fact that when we do the valuation, we always anticipate that we would have more and more retirees over time as baby boomers continue to sign up for the retirement. That's why we have a retirement system in the first place. So the number of retirees have actually gone up over time, which is again totally expected by the assumptions. But that is something that you need to be actively aware of, is because anytime if we were to report to you, let's say the good news, our retirees are living longer, that increase the liability, and now we have to turn over and have that be funded for by the payroll of the active employees, and then we may be looking for those active payroll dollars in order to spread those UAL. So something to watch out for as time progresses, to make sure that whether or not you may be interested in looking at any other policies, such as including the ones that Todd was referring to, that would allow us to add more tool to our toolkit so as to make sure that the contribution rate becomes more and more stable over time, in spite of the fact that there are a lot of things that are not under our control. For example, the number of active employees that may be hired by our employer, for example, the county.
So I do have a question. As a plan becomes more mature, does that increase the volatility of the employer's contribution rate, and is that something that they should be prepared for?
Yes, the short answer is yes, it does. And the bigger answer, or the longer answer, is we do, for some of our clients, we prepare an annual risk report where we evaluate different plan maturity metrics and what that means for the plan. And in there are two we look at in particular. One is called the liability volatility ratio, and another one's called the asset volatility ratio. Those two ratios are just, you take the liability and you simply divide it by payroll. Or you take the assets and you simply divide it by payroll. And why do we divide by payroll? Because that's how we set contribution rates, is as a percentage of payroll. So that is the window by which we're setting contribution rates. And as your liability grows relation to payroll, or as your assets grow in relation to payroll, then when it moves, and then you've got to set it as a percentage of payroll, that means the contribution rate moves more. So the long story short is, as your liability volatility ratio and your asset volatility ratio get larger as a percentage of payroll, when you see movements in it, it leads to more contribution rate volatility. It means that the contributions have to change by more in order to keep up with it. And so that's true of all mature plans. It's not just unique here. But as we get more mature, we do get more sensitive to changes in assets, and we get more sensitive to changes in liability, like assumption changes. And so there are ways that you can work on, like I mentioned with the contribution rate cliff, you can work on some risk mitigation features that can mute some of that volatility in the future. And that could be something for future discussion.
Thank you.
So would that be like extending periods, extending amortization periods to help with that?
No, we wouldn't. Extending amortization periods is just keeping more unfunded liability, which means more interest, means more total payments. That's not necessarily the goal. What some plans have done, and this, not to say this is a recommendation, but some plans have extended out their asset smoothing a little bit. So instead of 5 years, say 7 years asset smoothing. We have a few plans that do that. And that just helps mute a little bit of it. You don't want to go too far because then you never really catch up to what's happening on the asset side. But that's one possibility is extending the asset smoothing a little bit. Another possibility is when you have something like a contribution rate cliff, instead of going all the way down like 10 percentage points all in 1 year, you could come down in a measured fashion over time, which builds up a little bit of additional buffer. In case there's any losses to come, that buffer would offset it, and you could just keep bringing the contribution rate down over time instead of dropping it all the way down and then having it bounce back up in future years. So we've had some of that discussion, and we'd be happy to model some of that out when it's appropriate for our plan here.
That's around the 2036 year, is it not?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's about 10 years out.
Yeah, it's about 10 years out. There's a smaller drop-off around 2031, but the big one is 2036.
I think we made a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors based on your information to pay off some of that restart layer to save millions in interest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, to shorten the window
Correct.
by a few years.
And I thought there was additional talks regarding a bond commitment the county had and funding that would no longer be required for that bond, and even presenting ideas of using that funding to help pay down the UAAL faster as well to save millions in interest. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was a conversation, yeah. And as a matter of fact, I know Jerry was talking about CalPERS early on. So what happened at CalPERS is in lieu of assuming that the payroll base for the county will continue to grow at an assumed rate in this valuation 3%, we can actually model something which is lesser than 3%. So that way, if the county said, oh, you're right, we're not going to be able to, let's say, hire the employees that we want to hire because of budget and other considerations, we can actually reduce that assumption a little bit to make it, you can say, make it more realistic, consisting with how the county's hiring pattern may be for the next several years.
The staff assumption, or which assumption? Would you reduce?
Payroll.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the tricky thing right now is we amortize the unfunded payments as a level percentage of payroll. So we expect payroll to grow, and so the payments go like this over time. They grow up. So they start lower, and they don't pay off much interest at the beginning, but later on they get bigger and pay off more interest. What CalPERS did is they leveled that, and they just said, no, we're going to set it as a level dollar. Instead of as a level percentage of payroll where it grows, we just have a level dollar amount every year, kind of like most mortgages. And so that means higher payments up front and pays off more interest up front, and then it doesn't grow over time. It stays the same. And so that's the CalPERS model currently is a level dollar amortization. We do a level percentage of pay. Is payroll assumption 3% right now? 3% growth every year. So again, it has a slope to it. Starts lower and gets higher. And so you could either go to level dollar if we don't expect payroll growth in the future, or you could find somewhere in between where there's a smaller slope. But it does mean more contributions up front, but it means less acceleration of contributions later on.
But the payroll growth doesn't only happen because of the number of employees, because we've had 3 years of reduction in staff numbers, but the
salary
base of salary increases have exceeded your expectations. So we are paying less employees more money to work here. So that's why it continues on the climb, even though there's 3 years in a row of less employees.
That's right. So the payroll growth assumption takes into account all of that. It's headcount, salary growth, all of that put together. So we're talking about if there's an indication in the future, if it's even less, like we're going to hire even less people and we're going to do less salary increases. Like if it's a combination effect, that would be something to discuss in more detail.
It starts with inflation. The inflation assumption has core 2.5%, and then there's another 50 basis points. That 50 basis points, you could see if, bring that down to account for that if we think that's going to happen. The closed amortizations that Todd was mentioning, that's common on the level dollar, that's common on a closed pension plan when you're closed to new actives and you're saying, oh, we're not going to have future payroll growth. So it's interesting that CalPERS, which is not closed, does that. But it's a conservative, very conservative method. You just pay more up front for that.
So if the county's been on a trend of trying to reduce the workforce, but largely due to the fact of the increase in salaries, I'm not sure if the county fully understands the implication. That doesn't necessarily help just by reducing salaries if there's an implication across the board to actually the retirement rate, because I think there's probably an assumption that that helps with the retirement cost to have less.
It's interesting. There's two different ways that you can reduce salaries, or let's say that you could increase salaries. One is you could give your current staff all big raises, which actually increases liability a lot for the system because they already have all this service behind those salaries. Or you could bring in new hires who have no liability, but now add to the payroll of the plan. And that's actually, from a retirement perspective, from the plan perspective, that's actually much better in terms of those new people don't add liability right away, but they do add the salary and the payroll right away. So there's two different perspectives on that. Usually it's a mix of both, right? They're hiring some people and they're adding salaries over here, and you've got both going on.
With Shamise's comment, though, I think there's a general belief from the executive office and the board of supervisors that either maintaining or lowering the number of employees and maintaining their pay would be an immediate benefit to their contribution rate to lower it. But from what I'm hearing you saying is there is an automatic assumption that you guys build into the plan that it's going to grow. So we would have to adjust that assumption to then benefit the plan sponsor.
We don't assume that headcount is going to grow, but we do assume that individual salaries are going to grow.
And
I don't
remember,
know if I said that right.
the employer's contribution is actually composed of two components. There's a normal cost component, which is directly scalable to the number of employees you have. The other part being a payment or a contribution to pay off the unfunded liability. That originally gets calculated sort of as a dollar value and then converted into a percentage of payroll. So if your payroll is larger than expected, you have more go towards paying off your unfunded liability. And if your payroll is less, because let's say you cut the number of staff or you have little to no increases, then that doesn't mean that we didn't get necessarily as much. We make the employers make that up according to our funding policy. If the dollar value that they pay in on their unfunded liability contribution payment as a percentage of pay does not equal that minimum dollar value required, they have to make it up at the end of the year. But again, then that liability payment is being spread over potentially a smaller number of people, which makes that contribution rate for that portion higher. And then you're adding your normal cost to it to get the total employer contribution. And if I butchered that, I apologize.
Nope.
Fix anything I said that was wrong.
That was very good.
So the recent historical practice has been to encourage people to retire even and with incentives. So that is, I guess, taking people out of the plan that have years of service in, but also with a hiring freeze. So we're not necessarily hiring new people with lower experience.
It's interesting because from the employer perspective, when you encourage them to retire, you take them off employer payroll, right? So they certainly save money on the employer payroll side of things.
But
when people retire earlier,
we're also incentivizing them to.
Yeah, and when they retire earlier, it's usually more of a loss to the plan. When people retire later, it's usually more of a gain to the plan based on our expectations. So it does affect those things.
As a matter of fact, when we do our experience analysis early part of next year, we'll be looking at members who actually retire from the plan. So to the extent that this is becoming a trend that members are definitely retiring earlier than they used to, then we will come back to the board and actually inform you that yes, because our members are retiring earlier, they're drawing more number of pension checks. Therefore, we have to follow suit and put those assumptions, tighten up those assumptions to anticipate those earlier retirement. And it is going to increase the cost of the plan, everything else being equal.
And that assumption, when we look at those every 3 years, you're looking at like the number of people you expect to retire based on a particular age
That's right.
cohorts,
Exactly.
so to speak, right?
That's right.
So you might be shifting it to where people are leaving at an earlier age
Right.
and receiving benefits longer, even if the total number of retirees isn't significantly increasing.
That's right, yeah. So both the count and the age are important.
Executive, I thought you had a comment regarding my comment relating to the bond commitment.
I actually did, because the county has expressed that they have some budgetary concerns. I'm not sure the intention is that once they finally pay off the pension obligation bond, that, which will essentially free up some funds in their budget, that they would necessarily use any of that towards paying off our, a payment towards the unfunded liability of the plan. There had been some discussions with that with the previous executive officer at the county, but I don't know what their plan is for that, and that isn't something that was a firm agreement to do.
Yeah, just from my understanding of where we're looking at with the pension obligation bonds, which drop off in 27,
26, right, yeah.
26, that it would, with the budget crisis we have currently, it would be used to just reduce the deficit we have. But there certainly is understanding in the executive office and the board about if you do reduce the number of employees, that could have implications of higher cost for the county, for the retirement association.
It's two sides of the same coin. There might be certain types of cost savings, but then there's certain types of cost increases when you're reducing head count that I don't fully understand. So,
If I can just make one more comment on when you reduce payroll, now at least the normal cost of those people are not there, right? And on the unfunded liability side, you have a smaller payroll base, so the contribution rate will go up. The percentage rate will go up, but the dollar amount does not go up. I just want to make that clear. So it's not more total cost in terms of the dollar amount stays the same. It's just because we have less people to divide that dollar amount over, it means the rate itself goes up. So hopefully that's clear.
And I would point out to trustees, you can see that in the last few evaluation reports where the total rates are going, they're moving around, but the expected payroll dollars actually decrease. One other comment, the executive office is definitely aware of some of these facts. We definitely talk to them about that. And another thing that I would mention just for the board's awareness, my understanding when we had that discussion about potential uses of the additional POB funding, $7 or $8 million, is that, in addition to the county wanting to use the funds for other purposes, there was another small caveat being that the county is only one of 3 plan sponsors, and that contribution would in effect be for the entire system's benefit, not just the county's. And there may have been a way that the actuaries would have been able to adjust for that. I'm not an actuary and I don't know, but my understanding was that there was a little more hesitancy once the county sort of realized that even if they had made that additional payment, that it would have just gone to the system. It wouldn't have lowered any effective rates for the county alone.
You're talking about the court system and the cemetery?
Yeah.
The other contributors?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
The cemetery and the what?
The courts,
Superior Court employees are also contributors.
which are 3.5% or 4%, maybe 4. Let's say 4%.
Yeah. I didn't quite hear the word.
I have one other question. It's a small percentage of people, and it's just more out of curiosity I'm asking you because I was talking to an employee who just hit 30 years last week, and that is the practice with the county that the employee no longer contributes to their retirement. And for their retirement and their COLA, and from my understanding, that's smooth across the remaining members of that bargaining unit. So it doesn't have any impact on the plan, correct? Because you're still getting the same money from the employees. It's just one less contributor.
We still have to fund it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just spread across everyone else. That's right. And that's not just the counties. That's actually in the SURL.
Got it.
It's actually part of the law.
And my understanding is the regular basic component is actually picked up by the employer as part of the calculation of the employer contribution rate, but the employee's COLA cost is spread out among the remaining people in that tier. And we did have Siegel talk to us about that. I want to say it's almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah, the last experience study, yeah.
So it is on maybe our list of things to revisit.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say we've dealt with this with some of the other county plans as well, and part of the concern is this is only for legacy, right? This is not for Pepper members, and part of the concern is as the legacy group gets smaller, it's possible you could have a whole bunch of folks with 30 or more years of service and barely anyone with less than 30 years of service. So if you're trying to spread their cost over a few members, it could become unwieldy for those members. So it would make a lot more sense to actually have the employer cover that cost, because then it's just spread over the entire employer payroll instead of a few individual people. And so it may come a point where it'd be better to spread it that way. And that's the discussion we're having with the other county clients as well.
I mean, it start out with a small percentage of people that actually make it 30 years or longer in our system, and then those legacy members are retiring every day. So
right.
Okay.
So hearing no other questions, that concludes our valuation presentation.
I had another question, I guess. I'd love for you to go to page 45 and 46. And you sort of mentioned this briefly. You were talking about the volatility ratios, but can you sort of just go over these ratios and, again, kind of why they're important? And then maybe on page 46, I would ask, what are the trends that we should be noticing when we look at this page on page 46?
Yeah, so let's look at, so 46 is up, thank you. If we look at the, let's say AVR total, so just looking at the total asset volatility ratio, that's the fifth column, I suppose. 2016, that AVR was 7. And again, AVR is just the assets divided by total payroll, right? That's the number we're looking at here. As time has gone on, that has moved up, and now in 2025, it is 8.5. So I don't know, basic math is not my specialty anymore. Maybe that's about a 20% increase, give or take, 20%. And so what that means is if you had an asset change in 2016 and you had a similarly sized asset change in 2025, it would change the contribution rate by 20% more in 2025 than it would have in 2016. So this is telling you specifically how sensitive is your contribution rate to changes in assets. That's all this is telling you. That's the entire point. So as this number grows, it shows you that you're more sensitive to changes in asset values. Similarly, if you go to the far column, the liability volatility ratio has increased, but not by as much. You can see from 10.3 to 10.7, liability volatility ratio has increased a little bit. We're a little bit more sensitive to liability changes than we used to be when setting contribution rates. But the bigger changes on the
debate, and I told him I had no idea if that was a true statement, but he's like, I think over time you would expect them to hopefully approach each other.
Exactly. Yeah. So the liability volatility ratio is like the long-term stable expected volatility ratio. And even with that, you have pressures because on the one hand, you're getting more retirees and your plan is getting more mature, but we have new tier. And the new tier means that some of the liability is going down for some of our folks. So that helps relieve a little bit. That's why the liability volatility ratio hasn't increased by as much as you might expect. It's because you have an offsetting feature of folks going into new tiers, if that makes sense.
I do have an unrelated question. If you were talking about adding new employees and they don't bring any liability with them because they're new, how does potential reciprocity impact, and is that considered in the valuation?
We certainly consider that in the valuation. If folks are coming in, then the reciprocity isn't as big a deal. Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but the fact that, say they get higher salaries at Mendocino just means wherever they came from is going to have more liability because the salary goes back to where they came from. It's really the other way around if we have folks here that have a whole bunch of service and then go work for another county and then they get higher salaries there. That's going to affect the liability that they have here at Mendocino.
Okay.
I think
we saw that last year, right? I mean, that was a big line item in last year's report, that exact issue.
Yeah, I think at a lot of other systems, you would expect almost an equilibrium. Members coming in, members going out, about the same number. But of course, it's not a surprise for this board that over here, we're the training ground for a lot of other neighboring counties. Our members leave us to work for the other counties. And guess what? When they show up for retirement, we have to take into consideration the higher salaries that they have earned at the other systems. Not to say that it's not taken into consideration in the valuation process. When we do the experience study, we actually look at how many of those members there are. But the only thing we have to report back to the board is, well, if those members are truly leaving us and truly bringing higher salaries at the time when they retire from the plan, we have nowhere to go. We cannot go to the other counties and ask them to pay up. We have to go to our county, to go to Mendocino County and ask them to increase the contribution rate. So for us, it's not a fair trade-off because we definitely have more members leaving us to go to the other counties.
And when you project the liability of a deferred member, you assume the same payroll growth assumption for that member as if they were working. So whatever we said their pay is or their reciprocal salary is at their new jurisdiction, you're continuing to increase
Right.
that in the years they stay deferred.
That's right.
To get a better idea of what that true liability is.
That's right.
I've seen in my career that I think that's been extremely exaggerated with people leaving for safety members, especially because there's been signing bonuses implemented in neighboring counties, and some 2 counties away are up to $40,000
Sure.
signing bonus once they pass training. That we obviously can't compete with, and the pay is obviously better too. So it's going to impact our system negatively.
Yeah, we, of course, full disclosure, we like all of our clients. We like Sonoma. We know that our members go to Sonoma. That does not mean that we don't like
I didn't
the
say
other
any
counties.
names, Andy.
Exactly.
We need to start emphasizing just how bad the traffic situation is in Sonoma, just how horrible it is to live there.
Don't tell them about
One's been
Perkins.
under constant construction in the
Yeah.
21 years I've lived in California. So
I was going to say 15 years I've been coming
Hours
up.
of your life has been spent on Highway 101.
Sure, they'll start it again.
This would wrap that up, except for public comment.
Okay. I guess that's the end of this item.
Yes.
There's no further questions. I believe that constituted the board discussion portion of it as well. And is there any public comment?
There is none.
Okay, this is an item that needs to be approved. So is there, we would need a motion at this point, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll move the recommended.
Second.
We have a second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further comment now that we have a motion and a second? Questions? Okay, Judy, please, roll call, please.
Mr. Haschak?
Aye.
Mr. Cromer?
Aye.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Ms. Covison?
Aye.
And Mr. Land?
Aye.
Approved.
Okay, that will move us to item number 3.
Gas fee
9:30. We'll move right on into the actuary valuation study. Wait, no, I'm sorry. We've already did that. The Government Accounting Standards Gas 67 Actuary Valuation, and this is also by Siegel.
Yes. So thank you, Chair. I think I will make my comments very brief as we have gone through the valuation for the funding valuation. What's the difference between the funding valuation and the valuation that I'm looking at with you today is this valuation is used for financial reporting purposes. So we have to follow the governmental accounting standards, what the accounting rules in preparing this valuation. The most noticeable difference is in lieu of using a smooth market value of assets to compare against the liability, we have to use a so-called fair value of assets, which is accounting speak for market value of assets. So there is no leeway, and in order for you to get an unqualified opinion from your accountant, we have to use that market value. So other than use market value, there's a small adjustments in the liability. This has to do with some of our members who used to start from a lower cost tier, low benefit tier to a higher benefit tier. So we have to revise the liability a little bit. But all in all, we are looking at very little difference between the funding ratio and the UAAL if measured on a market value basis compared to the report you just adopted. So I think this is my shortest presentation on the GASB 67 report. So unless the board has any question, I think I would just leave it that way.
Okay, are there any questions? Is there any public comment?
There is none.
Seeing none, that will conclude this item, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you all, too.
Thank you.
Andy?
Yeah, thank you. I'll see you at the SACRS conference, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that will bring us to item number 5 in Investment Matters. Claire, Talene.
Great. Good morning, all. Oh my.
Nice to see you. As you may know, the only topic that we have to cover today is the third quarter market performance review and review of performance for the total portfolio. I know we've done a lot of work this year and it's required a lot of time by the board. So thank you for all that. And I'm glad to report that we have a good report this quarter and for the last year. So I think all the work that's been done is already proving fruitful. The Siegel
Screens, or would you like to share?
If you have
presentation, if you want to share screen, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm glad to. All right, so I'll start on page 3, and I think the Siegel team teed it up quite nicely. It's been a great quarter and a great year. So we have good numbers to report in terms of performance for the investment program. The last fiscal year, as you'll recall, ended June 30. The program was up 12.3%. So a very notable investment gain from the investment program over the last fiscal year. And then building on that in the most recent quarter, the first quarter of the new fiscal year, the portfolio was up 5.4%. So again, off to a good start this year. As always, we include a snapshot of the capital markets here as of the end of the quarter as context for the portfolio performance that we'll look at in a few slides. But the key headline is that the U.S. bull market extended in the third quarter. So we saw steady economic activity and ongoing enthusiasm for AI, really offsetting anxieties around trade policy, stubborn inflation. It does seem in the numbers thus far that the global markets are looking past the impact of U.S. tariffs, really showing confidence in the absence of a recession in the U.S. economy. So with those themes as the backdrop, you can see here that the S&P 500 index was up over 8% in the recent quarter. And small cap stocks represented by the Russell 2000 index jumped over 12%. That meant that trailing one-year returns landed at 17.6% for the S&P 500 index and 10.8% for small caps, again represented by the Russell 2000. Non-US stocks just below that also posted notable gains in the quarter and the year. Developed market stocks up 5.3% in the recent quarter, 16% for the year. And then emerging markets actually outpaced developed, up over 10% for the quarter and 17% for the last year. The third section down captures broad fixed income indices, and fixed income markets also posted broad-based gains in the third quarter. The Bloomberg aggregate, which is the top line there, was up 2% in the recent quarter. That's up from a second quarter gain of 1.2%. So a slightly better return this quarter than last quarter. And that Bloomberg aggregate is the relevant benchmark for the fixed income portfolio in the Mendocino County investment program. Not relevant to your investment program, but long duration bonds also rose in the quarter, up about 3% as rates came down. On the next slide, we have a handful of economic indicators that we include in this presentation, really, recognizing that the economy should drive markets in the long run. And the top left chart shows GDP, quarterly GDP. My main takeaway from this chart is that the U.S. economy has certainly been resilient. In the recent quarter, the release of GDP numbers is delayed, but the expected number is about 1.3%. So still positive, albeit a little bit softer than last quarter. Inflation trends on the top right show CPI coming in at about 3%. Largely range bound over the last 2 years and still above the Fed's long run 2% target, but notably below where we were, of course, just a few years ago. The bottom left chart shows the yield curve. The orange and the green lines are the two most recent quarters. So the orange line being 6/30, the green line being 9/30, so the end of the most recent quarter. And as you can see, the Treasury yield curve did steepen modestly in the recent quarter. The front end fell more sharply in anticipation of Fed rate cuts. On that topic, the Fed did, of course, deliver its first rate cut in 9 months during the quarter, a quarter point to the Fed funds rate in September. And then subsequent to quarter end, we saw another quarter point cut delivered just last week. The next few slides have additional detail by asset category. So starting with US equity, again, more context for the performance that we saw for your investment program. I mentioned the S&P 500 jumped 8% in the third quarter. So really an outstanding return for a single quarter. And that brought the year-to-date gains to 14.8%. Those gains were led by information technology stocks and communication services stocks, up 13% and 12% respectively. Again, on the continued enthusiasm for the AI trade, digital platforms. Consistent with that, the Magnificent Seven stocks that we continue to talk about were propelled further, really driving a significant portion of those gains. From a cap size and style perspective, again, as I mentioned before, small caps outperformed large caps. So Russell 2000 up over 12%, Russell 1000 up 8% for the recent quarter. But there were some interesting dynamics there that I'll touch on in a minute that are certainly relevant to the active managers in your program. And then growth stocks continued to lead value, again, consistent with the sector outperformance that I mentioned earlier. Digging in a little bit more on those small cap dynamics, I think it's important to note that while we saw the Russell 2000 index up 12% and similar returns for smaller market segments, mid cap and small cap, small and mid cap managers have really faced significant performance challenges in the recent years. So active managers have struggled to outperform benchmarks. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that those strong returns out of small and mid cap indices have really been driven by a lot of lower quality stocks. So think non-earners driving the gains, the outsized gains in those market segments versus profitable companies within the small and mid cap indices. An example of this, specific to the Russell 2500 growth index, so that's a mid cap growth index, non-earners in that index were up about 70% in the most recent 2 quarters. And then during third quarter alone, non-earners were up over 25%. And then by comparison, positive earning stocks were up 35% and 8% respectively. So we're talking about very strong positive gains. But again, just highlighting that non-earners, so non-profitable companies within those indices are driving a lot of the outsized gains, which were headwinds for kind of longer term focused active managers. From a philosophical perspective, your institutional quality managers are more focused on owning pieces of small companies versus really, benefiting from trade dynamics and trading on momentum. So you'll see in the report that your active small and mid cap managers did underperform their benchmarks due to those dynamics. But notably, they continue to fare well versus their peer groups. So it's not that they're, not doing well versus other smaller mid-cap managers you could employ in the program. It's really those unique concentration dynamics within the small and mid-cap market segments. On the next page, we look at a bit more detailed on the non-US equity markets. As I mentioned, non-US equities, again, extended their year-to-date lead over US markets. The MSCI ACWI ex-US index rose 6.9%, bringing the year-to-date gain to 26%. So a very notable gain out of non-US markets. Developed markets didn't keep up with US large cap markets in the recent quarter, but those year-to-date gains, again, do keep them ahead of US markets 2025 calendar year-to-date. Emerging market equities delivered very strong gains, so up 10.6%, and a lot of that was led by Chinese equities. So you can see in the chart on the top right, China was up 20.7% in the recent quarter and 30.8% over the trailing 1 year. Now, notably, your emerging markets managers fared particularly well in the recent quarter. So when we look at performance for those two managers versus benchmarks and peers, really came out on top in the recent time period. From a style perspective within non-US markets, value outperformed growth in developed markets, while growth outperformed value in emerging markets. That was a slight tailwind for Artisan, who's one of the new managers in your international equity portfolio, the new emerging markets manager. And then on the next page, fixed income. Fixed income markets posted broad-based gains in the quarter. Again, the Bloomberg aggregate up 2%, up 6.1% year to date, as yields declined. So glad to see gains out of the fixed income market over the last quarter and year. Investment grade corporate bonds were a bright spot to be. So from a sector perspective, investment grade corporate bonds and high yield, both tailwinds to active managers. Both of your active managers, Dodge & Cox and PIMCO, have done notably well versus the benchmark and peers. Dodge & Cox in particular is focused on corporate bonds. They're kind of a one-trick pony, but they do it really well. And this has been a notably good environment for their relative performance. And then the last page here on the market environment covers real estate. This is as of the second quarter. So the third quarter update wasn't available at the time of publishing. We do have it now, but generally the key takeaways are the same. So number one, we continue to see positive returns out of real estate. And that's really driven by income for the most part versus appreciation. Moving forward to slide 10. We'll look at performance for the investment program. So here on slide 10, as always, at the top of the page, we have market value for the program in total over the last 15 years. And I think this does a really nice job of capturing the immense market growth, planned growth that we've experienced over that time period, from just over 300 million 15 years ago to over 800 million today. With that in mind, as of the end of the third quarter, we are at a new high watermark, $833.5 million in total assets. The bottom of the page here captures that growth over the last 1 year time period. So as of September 30th last year, the program was at 754 million in total assets. In the last 1 year, we've experienced investment gains of over $88 million. And about $9 million has left to pay benefits largely, landing us at, again, $833.5 million as of the end of September 25. Page 11 is always just a good check, capturing actual asset allocation of the plan versus the target as of the end of the quarter. These pie charts remain in line. Again, a testament to Robert's rebalancing of the program, keeping us right in line with those intended targets. I always look at the percent difference column. The key point there is that none of those differences are outside of the ranges specified in your investment policy statement. Real estate was about 2% underweight. The exact target as of the end of the quarter, infrastructure overweight by about 1%. So the total real assets portfolio right in line with kind of the broad target there, but that slight underweight hopefully will be a benefit to Robert's implementation of the new real estate manager implementation going forward. Great.
The trustees, we're going to try to close that gap a little bit January 1. So we're about the 18 million underweight, and we're hoping to maybe deploy somewhere between 10, 15, 16 million dollars from our equities into real estate. And because it's going to take us some time to get funds out of, and there's of both the bearing strategy and the overweight to our infrastructure managers, that process of full implementation is going to take a few quarters. We're not going to be able to get any funds, let's say, from infrastructure until probably after March. and March or June. And so we're not going to be able to fully deploy the full real estate allocation. Will still be slightly underway, but that'll be less so. So I'll give you some more information as we learn more. But, for example, one of those challenges is we don't know how much funding we're going to get from both reef or bearings until about a week before they actually decide to tell us the number. And that doesn't give us enough time to let the new managers know how much that money is going to be. So we basically have to dip into those liquid segments of the portfolio, go underweight for a day or two or three or less than a week potentially. When we get that cash infusion from those managers, then we can redeploy into, let's say, the S&P 500, just as an example. So expect to see a fair amount of movement come January, February, March timeframe, just to sort of let you know that that's on the way.
Do you have a question?
What's going on in India, Claire?
Admittedly, I don't have a great answer offhand for you, but I would gladly get back to you, Jerry.
My question to you is, I've noticed a lot of other plans do keep cash around. Is cash how they would typically handle this kind of rebalancing that you're doing in terms of, us choosing a new manager for real estate? Is there a reason that we keep zero cash?
So there is a reason we keep zero cash. I think the reason that we historically have kept zero cash is because for the last 15 years, cash has been a drag, right? The 90-day treasury's been, a quarter basis point, 10 basis points for a long time. So it really wasn't worth doing that. Of course, since the Fed jacked rates up in 22, it's been better. But we also, in addition to that, so there's the historical, the historical factor. It's not worth it to keep the money there. That environment flowed into our investment policy statement that basically says don't keep any cash around, too. I don't necessarily know, so we use the county treasury pool for our cash account. That's this 241,000 that's reported here. I've never had any conversation related to the Treasury on their thoughts of leaving a large balance there, for instance. Now that is a completely separate place than the State Street account. We can also keep cash overnight in the State Street account in some sort of a extreme scenario, but really I would only feel comfortable doing that a day or two at most.
And to answer part of your question, Alex, regarding systems that may keep a permanent allocation of cash, that's typically for liquidity purposes. And while we actually do our cash flow negative, we choose not to keep a cash allocation, but to pull from our invested assets as cash needed to pay benefits that becomes due. But with a dedicated cash allocation, they may have an overall portfolio structure which is more illiquid, more investments in alternatives and things like that, where they have a desire to keep a specific allocation of cash for benefits.
Cash in order to pay their benefits because they can't pull. They can't liquefy.
There might be lending involved, right? So there's a whole bunch of different other alternative investments that they could have. They could have overlays. They could be using leverage. It could be there for a number of different reasons. So the specific reason why other systems have more cash than we do, I couldn't speak to that without identifying individual ones, but it's probably related to varying degrees of investment portfolio complexity, most likely involving lending, securities lending, shorting, using some type
Private
of
assets that are less liquid.
it's probably related to forwards or future contracts or derivatives. Some other over-the-counter instrument would be my guess is why they do that. Hard to say.
Yeah. If they have a call.
Yes.
Just to follow up on when I was getting dressed this morning, I was listening to the Supreme Court justices question what the whole tariff challenge. If by chance those tariffs were declared illegal, what do you think is going to happen? And I know I'm asking you to pick out of the blue, but there was some really good questioning from Amy Coney Barrett, and I didn't think there was a chance, but I think there might be one that the court would declare it, and I know it won't be right now, but would declare the tariffs illegal. Any thinking? Any talking about that?
Sure. I mean, there could certainly be impacts from a market perspective, but overall, we saw a lot of volatility at the beginning of the year in the markets related to the announcement of tariff policy and changes to those tariff policies. But as we stand today, the markets tend to be looking past tariffs with strong reported profits, U.S. strong GDP growth, falling expectations for recession, those things being what's fueling investor confidence. So I think while we could certainly see some impact within the markets, I think it might be more muted than we would have expected at the beginning of the year when a number of these announcements were rolling out.
Back. I think that's probably the most,
what I'm
right? If they have to pay that money back, it depends on the balance in the Treasury General account, which I'm not aware where that balance is. It's probably a couple $100 billion. I don't know. The federal government's going to have to pay that back. So if it's more than, let's say, $200 billion or whatever they think they need, they're going to have to raise that money.
Yeah.
How do they raise the money? They issue treasuries, right? So that could, depending on what tenor that they want to be issuing, maybe they're issuing 1 month, maybe they're issuing 90 days. They've been on a 1 month binge, by the way, every week, $100 billion. I mean, it's large. It's the largest it's ever been. That could potentially push up rates on the short end of the curve. That would be good for somebody like us. We're not at the shortest end of the curve. We're more in the 5-year bucket. But if those rates go up, that's a good thing from our fixed income perspective. Maybe it's a less good thing for the economy, certainly. But treasuries are still the gold standard for collateral and for the financial system around the world. And there's massive demand outside the U.S. for all of those things.
Amazing.
So I think probably Claire's saying it's right. It's not going to be that big of a deal, but I would expect the mechanism to be issuing more treasuries.
Thank you.
I actually have a follow-up question too about India. I'm wondering just what had you heard that you're curious about with regard to India?
Negative return showing on.
Oh.
Yeah, they're a big negative on the
Slight
chart.
seven.
They were like the only negative
Yeah,
on
and a
page
large.
6. Minus 13.2.
for a year.
Yeah.
Minus 7
Minus
for
7,
a
6.
quarter.
Yeah.
They were a powerhouse.
Especially with China being so strong.
Well, didn't they get hit with a big tariff?
Yes, but so has China and many other countries. So, yeah.
I know last year they had a big run up just generally in markets, so maybe a little bit of that is sort of this mean reversion factor. I also don't know enough about the specific Indian indexes to really be able to comment. But we can check that out and talk about it in the future.
Thank you.
Back to you, Claire.
All right, let's move forward to page 14. Just a last highlight on asset movement within the portfolio. This gives all the detail of how the portfolio is implemented with each of your individual asset categories and investment
managers. As shown on the bottom of the page here, we look at how that's changed over the course of the last quarter at the total portfolio level. So just as of the end of the fiscal year, as the end of the last quarter, we were at $793.5 million in total assets. We experienced an investment return that equated to $43.3 million in investment gain for the portfolio. So if you'll recall, over the last year, I noted an $88 million investment gain. A good chunk of that, $43 million of it, came just in the last quarter. And then about $3.3 million left the program to pay benefits, leaving us with $833.5 million as of the end of the quarter. I always again, 15 years ago, we were at just over $300 million in total portfolio assets. So an incredible gain over that time period. I always like to look up and down the implementation row as of the end of the last quarter, how much money sits with each individual manager and how those managers remain in balance within each asset category. Unsurprisingly, each manager represents exactly its intention from a dollar and a percentage perspective within each asset category. Again, a testament to Robert's work keeping everything well in balance. And then the net new investment column in the middle of the page, again, highlights some of the rebalancing activity that occurred in the last quarter. In general, money moving out of emerging markets, large cap US equities, areas where we saw very strong performance in the last quarter, and into small and mid cap equities and notably fixed income. On page 15, we have performance for the total investment program as of the end of September. And as I mentioned at the outset, the total plan was up 5.42% for the recent quarter, outperforming the total fund benchmark. Notably, as of this report, we actually didn't have the return for one of your infrastructure managers. So we would expect this number to actually go up a little bit once we have that finalized. But that performance landed very favorably versus a peer group of other public pension plans in the 12th percentile. So really top of the heap. Over the last year, similar story, a very strong absolute return, up 11.74%, just ahead of the total fund benchmark and at the top of that peer group in the top decile. Longer term returns point out that the investment program has certainly been successful over all longer term time periods shown here. Over the last 10 years, the program has earned an annualized almost 9% gain. So that's the equivalent of a 9% gain every year for the last 10 years. And in all cases has ranked favorably versus other public pension plans. I'll skip ahead to page 20, where we start to look at the returns for the individual asset category components of the investment program. First thing I note here is that we've seen, again, gains across almost every asset category, where we have seen gains across every asset category, but across almost every time period. So the only negative return we see on the page here is over the last 3 years, real estate is still in negative territory. Over the last quarter, I note that every asset category except domestic equity outperformed its respective benchmark. What's going on in domestic equity really has to do with the dynamics that I mentioned earlier. So We maintain a strategic overweight to small and mid cap within domestic equity, and active managers really saw performance headwinds versus benchmark within domestic equity in the recent time periods. Still up 7.6%, so a notable absolute gain, and over the last quarter, earning over 14%. Over the last 3 years, we've seen a 22% annualized gain out of your domestic equity portfolio. All other asset categories, as I mentioned in the last quarter, turning in positive results and ahead of their respective benchmarks. Digging into domestic equity a bit further on page 21, top left pie chart captures your actual implementation with each of the managers. And again, just focusing on your domestic equity portfolio here. So as a reminder, the majority of the portfolio, all of the large cap US equity is implemented with a passive Vanguard S&P 500 index fund. That represents about 70% of the total portfolio. We talked a lot about the significant gains that we've seen out of the S&P 500 index in recent time periods. So this investment program certainly benefiting from that exposure. And then your active risk is taken with your small and mid cap implementation. 2 managers each, 1 growth, 1 value, 1 growth, 1 value in mid cap. Each of those managers represents about 7.5% of the total domestic equity portfolio. Again, right in line with intentions per Robert's Good rebalancing. You know, the key thing that stands out on this page is the top right chart, that weighted median market cap, the blue bar versus the green bar. Again, just highlighting the strategic overweight to small and mid cap within the implementation of this portfolio versus the Russell 3000 index.
So you can see the total Russell 3000 index has about 83% in large cap, whereas our portfolio is about 70%. And the mid and the small, you can kind of see that, right? We've got the blue numbers are larger than those green numbers right there.
Alex?
Yes.
Are we looking at a bubble in IT? It's just basically seven companies, correct? Most of them here in California. It just seems like there's are winds out there that are speaking bubble.
Yeah, I think so. Now, you know, maybe it's not a bubble that'll pop, but maybe it's just a bubble that deflates. Mm-hmm. Bubble still is there. It just gets quite a bit smaller. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that what's happening with the OpenAI and NVIDIA looks like Enron.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, in part.
Absolutely.
I mean, it looks like that.
I don't know if I'd go to the Enron level with NVIDIA.
It's very similar.
They really do make chips. So,
well, they do, but you know, Enron was really a commodity trader also, right? It's right. Just the money that they were recognizing was their own money, right?
My concern would be the massive build out of data centers.
Yes,
that's the if that slows down, I would, and I expect that it will.
Yeah, I mean the technology.
That's where I feel the bubble.
Yeah, technology is changing so fast. I mean, I've seen multiple examples from Meta where they've built or attempted to build a data center and then just stopped halfway through because their whole plans and the infrastructure setup of the building, the technology changed and they felt it was actually cheaper just to blow the $150 million and just go start again.
Valuations are certainly high. We've been talking about valuations being high for a number of years now.
There are, arguments that there's fundamentals to support some of it, but I don't think. But yeah, stocks are expensive.
On page 22,
we look at more detailed performance for the domestic equity composite in total. You'll note, again, very strong absolute returns, but the domestic equity composite has trailed the return of the Russell 3000 index. Over time, I think that gap is a bit more narrow than what we've seen on individual calendar year bases at some points. But in the last quarter and year, the overweight to small cap coupled with the underperformance of active management within those asset categories has been the headwind to relative performance. Still, you can tell from the blue dot rankings over time, your domestic equity portfolio has fared pretty well versus a peer group of other public funds implementation of the same asset category. Pages 23 and 24 show the same set of returns, but specific to just your mid cap and small cap managers. To me, the takeaway from these two pages is really kind of the same, and that's that while your mid cap and small cap managers together, have underperformed their respective Russell 2000 and while they've underperformed their respective mid cap and small cap benchmarks, they've actually done quite well in combination versus other mid cap mutual funds and small cap funds. So again, one other way to highlight that we don't think that your managers in particular are doing anything out of line. It's just that the dynamics within small and mid cap have been challenging for active managers.
What I'm seeing for domestic equity compared to the Russell 3000, we're underperforming compared to the index.
What page?
On page 22. Throughout the last 15 years, every one of them is underperforming compared to the index. When you look at the page 23, the mid caps underperforming practically the whole, for at least for the last 5 years. And then you go to the page 24 and the small caps underperforming, for the last 3 years. So why aren't we just going with the index? Is that question.
yeah, that is something that we
dissected in detail last year, I believe it was, and that we relook at every few years. Now, frankly, the overweight to small and mid cap in general is because we believe there is a premium to be had in small and mid cap stocks over time. But frankly, that hasn't played out in the last, 5 and 10 years. Large cap stocks have dominated U.S. equities, so that overweight to small and mid cap has not provided the tailwind to performance that we would have expected. We've looked at fundamentals of small cap and mid cap, and do think that earnings, could support a revision to that on a go-forward basis, but you're right, the overweight to small cap has not played out because of the dominance of really just a handful of large cap U.S. stocks. So I think that's kind of the key dynamic, but a lot of the comparison versus peers, I think, helps to fill in that we're not alone, right? It's not that the mid cap and small cap implementation that we have in this portfolio has taken the wrong bet and everyone's gone a different direction. It's really more a comment on the dynamics of market concentration, of large cap U.S. stock dominance. Again, all the talk of the Magnificent Seven stocks that have really driven a majority of returns within a lot of these kind of broad U.S. benchmarks, the Russell 3000, S&P 500 in particular. Now, I will say historically, there used to be large cap active implementation within the portfolio. There were other holdings that that the board's moved away from over time, I think in favor of simplicity, one, and also really just recognizing kind of where it's worth spending your active risk budget. So the conclusion was we're not getting the benefit out of active large cap that we would have wanted, and so moving to, again, 70% implementation with a passive index.
Hashtag is referencing is the exact approach we took on international equities, is it not? To move away from that, but from my recollection, the discrepancy between the index and what we were in was a little greater, and that's what drove that decision in my memory.
Absolutely. In the international portfolio, it was sort of a legacy hodgepodge, I would say, of managers that didn't necessarily have a clear, coherent structure. And that's actually something that I wanted to sort of point out once we finish this, just briefly. In the full summary report, in the full report, we can kind of see that pretty clearly, that structure laid out on a couple pages. So that's something that I want to point out when we get there. Page 22 is the total equity composite performance, right? We know we have that structural overweight on the small and mid cap funds, and we can see that sort of underperformance, right? 15, 30%, 20% of our fund has been exposed to these lower performing companies within the market, and we can see that all across the board on slide 22. On slide 23, looking at just the mid caps, we can see that in the last 3 years, really, the mid caps have sort of struggled to reach the benchmark. And so the other thing we want to consider and remember here is that we've got two managers. There's one growth manager, that's a particular style, and there's one value manager, that's a complementary style. But we can definitely see that in the first three columns, quarter, last year, 3 years, that the managers have underperformed between both of them. On the longer term periods, they're either right at or above the benchmark. But I would note also, look at the 10-year box, look at the 7-year box. Our managers are sort of at the top of all those boxes. There's a fair amount of box down below there. And so what that's telling me is that most of the managers in the Callan database here are not doing that well. They're mostly all below in the 7-year box, right? They're mostly all below the green, the index there. So, that's telling me there's a sort of that our managers are doing better than most of these other managers. That's a good thing. They're in the top quartile. Of course, we want to see them above 50. Those numbers in the brackets, really want to see those always above 50.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And
that I'd also add that we have to keep in mind that these numbers can be endpoint sensitive. So I keep harping on the dynamics in the last 1 year, but I think, that does matter in terms of how we look at the last quarter, year, and 3-year time periods here. But when each of these managers was hired, and they've all been part of the investment program for quite a while now, it's with the expectation that they'll be able to outperform over a full market cycle. So to Robert's point, looking at the 5, 7, and 10-year time periods, and that the combinations have been able to outperform and do well versus peers, I think is a testament to good selection over those longer time periods.
Cycle. What does that even mean?
it varies.
I would say we generally define it as 5 to 10 years is kind of what the time periods that you're looking at to think of a full market cycle. But do we have a full market cycle when we see a downturn and a rebound in one year? I would argue not. But I think over the 10-year time period is probably a good focal point from a timeline perspective.
Yeah, so basically making judgments on those shorter time frames difficult to be sure that you're making the right judgment. On those longer term periods, 7, maybe 5 years, 10 years, that you have a much better chance of making the right decision, saying this manager has skill, we know they do, we believe in their approach. So very hard to do on a quarter basis, almost worthless. I don't want to say it quite like that, but it's very challenging to accurately assess on those shorter time frames.
As far as our timeline on our schedule for MSERA, I think next year, and Claire, jump in if I'm wrong, is when the asset allocation study would occur.
That's right.
And then that would restart what we're just finishing with each individual asset class, where I think you would have a better perspective, Mr. Haschak, of after we set the asset allocation and we start that process with each individual asset class to pursue those conversations on the index versus the active manager.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we talk about. We've talked about it as a board quite a bit. This last 3-year cycle has, we've done a lot more work and changes to the portfolio than had been done previously. So I expect that we'll sort of continue that review just to make sure that the entire board is comfortable with the structure and the managers that we have today.
See what you're going to miss.
Maybe just to go back to Quincy's point about the alignment of the U.S. equity implementation with international equity implementation with the changes that were made last year, we'll jump to page 26, which highlights that same pie chart. How have we implemented the international equity composite with manager allocation? And as you can tell, this looks very similar. So again, kind of rhymes with the philosophy of the implementation of domestic equity. So 63% of the international equity composite now implemented with a passive developed markets index fund, and then active risk is taken in the less efficient areas of the market, that's emerging markets, and an active allocation to small cap. Similar to what we pointed out on the US, a slight overweight to small cap. Again, T. Rowe Price and Brandis representing an out of benchmark allocation to dedicated small cap international equity. And then on page 27, the same information that we looked at for the domestic equity composite, for the non-US equity composite. Historically, non-US equity has actually been the most challenging asset category for this investment program. As you all know, we did a lot of work to make changes to that implementation, and I'm pleased to report that while it's a short time period, out of the gate results look very strong. So the international equity portfolio up 7.3% for the last quarter, outperforming the benchmark and ranking very well versus other international equity portfolio implementations by other public funds. Same thing for the last year, international equity up 18% versus about 16.5% for the benchmark and ranking favorably versus peers. So again, short time period there, but glad to see good results right out of the gate here for the new implementation.
Stand by and still support our decision to go with the index?
I do.
All right, that's what it looked like to me.
And frankly, the
decisions that have been made by the board over the last, 3 years, really, more than that, but kind of with the broad guiding principles of simplifying where it makes sense and taking active risk in kind of less efficient areas of the market where we think we have the best chance of outperformance over time. Individual manager performance for all of your international equity managers is on page 28. Again, short time periods for the new managers, Brandis and Artisan, but generally good results out of the gate. The small cap managers both up about 4.5% in the recent quarter, ranking above median versus their peer group, but behind the broad small cap benchmark. Emerging markets managers, 91 and Artisan, both fared really well in the recent couple quarters, in the last quarter in particular, both outperforming their benchmark and ranking in the top quartile of the peer group. And the index fund manager, as expected, tracking its respective index. Rounding out performance here, we have fixed income on page 29, and then we'll look at real assets. No concerns with any of your asset categories or managers at this point in time. The fixed income composite implemented with 2 managers, Dodge & Cox and PIMCO. Page 30 shows performance for the combination of these 2 managers over time. It's, a simple implementation, and it's really worked well. The combination of Dodge & Cox and PIMCO has outperformed the benchmark and, fared well versus the peer group over all time periods shown here. In the last quarter in particular, your 2 managers together ranked in the top decile of the peer group and pretty handily outperformed the benchmark by about a 0.5 percentage point. Performance for each, yeah.
In most of these boxes. The Callan universe, those managers are all above that. So that's just, kind of quirky. The ag is a huge benchmark.
The active managers have been outperforming.
Yeah, I mean, that might actually be an interesting bit of education to dive into that benchmark. It's an important benchmark for us with, 21% of the portfolio allocated towards it. Yeah, I just sort of wanted to mention that. We could spend all day looking at one benchmark, but we probably don't want to do that.
Could.
Yeah.
But importantly, your implementation has worked well. It's simple, it's elegant, and it's worked really well. Robert, to your point, fixed income has certainly been a fruitful area for active managers, and that's why you employ active risk in that asset category. I know in all
of the asset category reviews that we've done in the last year and a half, fixed income is the last one. It's up next, so we could certainly have a dedicated conversation on the benchmark and your active manager implementation as well. And then I will finish off on pages 34 and 35. Page 34 captures the returns for your real estate managers and your infrastructure managers. I did mention that JP Morgan, one of your infrastructure managers, had not yet reported at the time of publishing here. When we do add in that return, we would only expect results to improve in the recent quarter and year. But overall, positive returns across both categories. Barings, we know, is moving out of the portfolio, but did turn in a solid return for the recent quarter and the last year. We heard from them directly a couple quarters ago in terms of, changes that they've made to the portfolio, getting, office assets out of the portfolio to improve prospects on a go-forward basis, and that's benefited the returns that we've seen in the last year, certainly. So changes underway there, but glad to see good performance from them in the recent time periods. And then Reef as well had a great quarter, up 1.6%, actually posted a positive appreciation return in the recent quarter, and fared well versus other Odyssey managers. And then both infrastructure managers continuing to turn in gains, both in the recent quarter and solid gains over the last year and 3-year time periods. In general, the decision to add infrastructure has absolutely been a good one for your portfolio. One chart that we have in here that I didn't hit on is always looking at the total portfolio risk versus return versus the peer group and the benchmark over time. And historically, the MSERA portfolio had a high return, but with a higher volatility, a true reliance on public market equity. And adding infrastructure was an intended decision, or the decision to add infrastructure was partially based on an intention to reduce some of that public market dependence and reduce some of that total fund volatility. And I'd actually like to add in a version of this chart that just looks at the last 3 or 5 year time period that does include infrastructure in the portfolio. I think you've successfully moved that blue dot into the left, so lowering volatility and actually turning in a higher return than the total fund target over those time periods with the changes. Last slide I'll hit is 35. As always, we include this as just a report out on, the additional manager monitoring and meetings that we have with your managers on an ongoing basis. Of course, we're looking at things beyond just performance, so changes in philosophy, team, organization, and really nothing new to report out here today. All of your managers remain in good standings. The yellow coloring is on bearings, and those are issues that we've talked about, and there's been a decision to move on going forward. So nothing new.
In-depth update for real estate and infrastructure at the next meeting. Because of timing, we weren't able to get that done for this particular meeting, but that will be presented in December. JP Morgan, we just got our statement today, had a net 2.7% return for the quarter. So it'll probably increase the total return of the portfolio by 2 to 5 basis points, so a little bit more. So that's a good thing. Strong performance from them, as we've come to expect. I wanted to draw the trustees' attention to the full presentation briefly, really quick. If we can we pull that up and go to page 29? Full report, page 29. Maybe make it fully big there. Can you expand it and full screen it? Yeah, there you go. You're getting close. You're close. You might have passed it. Oh no, it's right there. Right there. Yeah. Yeah. So this is really just, we're looking at this for reference. I'd like trustees to note where our managers are on this style map. Of course, this is just one moment in time, but we can still sort of see where Vanguard is up in the top, kind of slightly on the right there. Our mid-cap manager, Janice, and Fidelity down on the left. In this moment in time, Fidelity's looking a little more small-cappy right there. They're still on the value side, Prudential, AB. So this just sort of shows the capitalization size on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, the value or growth tilts that our managers have. And we can see that our total domestic equity, the lime green up in the middle, is in between mid and large, and it's just a little bit to the right on the core. So remember that structure, and then let's go forward to slide 50. Slide 50, here's our international portfolio. And so you can hopefully see kind of the similarities between the two. This is the same type of graph. We can see our new index right up in the middle, right up in the core middle, our total portfolio, the lime green international equity, kind of in the same area, basically, right? And down at the bottom, we can see Brandis on the value, looking like they're deep value, maybe. They're verging on that. And the T-Row strategy. And then we can also see the new EM strategies up there also in the large cap. So that structure, from a structure perspective, where the managers are up on the Y and the X axis, now they're similar. These are much more similar between the domestic equity composite and the international equity composite. They're closer. So that's been a good thing. And I think that was really part of the impetus to the move, is to match the manager structure with the universe more. So that was a good thing. That was really all I wanted to kind of point that out. This is the first quarter with the new structure, and appears to be working out well, and we'll see what happens in the future.
Okay. Is there any board discussion on either the short form or the long, detailed report, quarterly report? I'm looking for.
You're on item 5.
Right, yeah. Do we have any board discussion? And do we have any public comment on these items?
There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And what I'm going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break and then move into item 6. It's 11:40, and our clocks are synced. So let's be back here at 10. It's 10:40. I'm sorry. Let's be back here at 10:50.
Bye, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks all.
See you.
Mics are on and we're ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, this brings us to item 6, State Association of California Retirement Systems Matters. Doris Rentschler, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Land. The SACRS business meeting occurs at the fall conference next week, and our representative attending will be asked to vote on the items on the SACRS business agenda. There's actually only one action item on the SACRS business meeting agenda, and that is item number 5 regarding the SACRS Legislative Committee proposal for 2026. The items outlined in that section of the business packet are the recommendations to bring forward an item to the state legislature to make modifications to the county employees retirement law. They are all cleanup items. There's nothing really substantive here. It's areas where they said earnable compensation instead of compensation earnable, and they want to make it aligned throughout the serial. They also want to make some clarifications on different provisions and bring us in line in some cases with how PERS handles concurrent retirement issue date. So it's all just cleanup. It is the only action item. It's item number 5 on the SACRS business packet agenda, and my recommendation is that the voting member from Sarah who attends the business meeting at the conference next week vote in favor of the legislative proposal. This is an action item, or not action, I apologize. This is a direction item for the board to give direction to their voting delegate who will be attending that meeting on how to vote.
I'll move that recommended action.
Okay, I think before we do that, though, we need to decide who the voting delegate is. Do we need to do a
I
official?
believe by policy that would be you, or as our policy delegates, it would be a trustee attending the meeting. If you are unable to attend due to your travel schedule, another trustee attending can vote. Last option would be assigning it to me. I am included in the policy as the third tier.
Okay, so yes, I will be there, and I will vote in favor of the options if that's what we decide on. Will you also, or will any other trustee also be at the business meeting, or will I be there by myself?
I expect that I will be at the business meeting. I have time because my flight's out is not till later, so I was going to stay through the business meeting.
All right, because it's a lot of fun, and I'll be glad to not be by myself this time like I was last time.
Well, I might be there too.
All right.
I don't know when the business meeting is, but.
It's at, about 10:30 till 11:30?
Yeah, it follows the last general session item on Friday, the close of the conference. So right after the last general session, they go to, I believe it's going to be held in Salon D, and do a very short business meeting where they get directions and receive reports like the treasurer's report, minutes, etc. But this was the only action item, was item number 5 in that legislative agenda, or excuse me, in the business meeting agenda.
Is there any reason for me to understand, or for any trustee to understand the difference between pension compensatable and compensatable, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I mean, I did read through that, and was there any?
In the serial, they define the compensation that's included for benefit calculation purposes for our legacy tiers, and that's called compensation earnable. But elsewhere in the code, those words got flipped around and they kept saying earnable compensation. So this just changes those typos, essentially, or Scrivener's errors, back to the phrase they used when it was defined as compensation earnable.
There was also quite a few edits to, I believe they were adding the word active to several of the lines, active members, and I wasn't sure, was that active members who were, I believe it was to clarify that people in deferred status can't vote for trustees. Is that?
I believe you're correct
right?
on that. They are distinguishing that when it specifies members who are eligible to vote for positions on this board for the elected seats that the member is an active member voting for the active, and a retired member can vote for the retired. Deferred members do not get to vote.
Okay, thank you. And so do we need to just accept direction, or do we need to do a motion?
There's no motion,
Okay.
and assuming that there's any other comment from the board on the direction provided by Trustee Haschak.
Okay, it sounds like direction has been given.
Okay.
And we've noted it, and that will move us on to item number 7, fiscal year 2026 first quarter budget update. And I don't have a name here, but I assume it's Robert.
Trustees, you have the preliminary first quarter budget update for fiscal year 26. The accompanying reports and memo. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions or discussions? Okay, any
answered them
public comment on this item?
There is none?
There is none. Thank you very much, Robert. And that will bring us to item number 8, draft topics for agenda for February educational offsite. Doris Rentschler, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Land. In your board packets is a draft agenda for the February offsite. I wanted to get direction regarding some of the proposed topics and/or offer alternatives. The focus initially is to discuss plan maturity and cash flow considerations. Our consultant Callan would be providing that. And I wanted to mirror that with a discussion from our actuary on maturity and sustainability as far as design issues and expected assumption changes as the plan matures. Alternatively, we could look at a presentation from Siegel on understanding your plan's funding policy, especially since we have some newer trustees and we will potentially have at least a candidate or trustee-elect who hasn't taken office yet attending the February meeting. Understanding the funding policy may also be helpful. We could maybe even look at doing both of those topics. We threw out a couple of potential case studies, one being the State Teachers Retirement System of Ohio, and some of the issues that they have run into, and also one on infrastructure with the Thames Water. Additionally, I'd like to hear the thoughts on whether or not to include a cybersecurity-ish item, and if so, what type of specific topic on cybersecurity the board is interested in. I know specifically, Chair Land, you had asked about fleshing that out to get an idea. And so those are the things that I'm looking for direction on, is really, do you have any other topics you want to include? Are there any here that you want to vote down or ensure are incorporated, or if you have any feedback on any of the proposed topics?
If I'm the only person interested in cybersecurity, then we really don't have to do it. I guess it's all taken care of, but
You know, we were talking this over. I did approach both Tony and John Gall, Tony Rakes and John Gall, on the subject, and we were trying to think of what would be relevant, and none of us could really come to a really good, understanding of what would be helpful. We certainly would be able to provide, a background into various cybersecurity topics. And I do have a commitment from Tony to do so if we decide that we want one. We wouldn't be able to really get involved in assisting with training of retirees from that point of view. But we could give a background into, of course, how we maintain our security for the county, which does pertain since in many respects you're clients of the county, for IT and how we protect from that point of view. Obviously, trying to prevent any kind of identity theft is a very big deal. If somebody were to be able to, hack an identity of one of the staff members here, that could be obviously very, very dangerous. We could put something together, but I'm not of the opinion
Not if
that
it's
gonna
just
be-
me,
If
so
it's, that it's
I
going
don't
to be
have a problem.
tremendously useful. We can do it if the board wants to. We can do this. It won't be me giving the demonstration. That was one of the options, or giving the presentation.
Well, I guess my point would be, how is it going to make me a better MSARA board member? And am I going to get that information, be able to use it? It's probably going to go way over my head, as far as, cybersecurity, what you're doing and all that. It's okay.
The people who are employees of the county would probably have the least to benefit, because hopefully we've been doing our job appropriately and you're already aware of the items that we can make you aware of. For the board members who are not public, employees of the county, we would have no other way to really, reach out and educate. So, I'm on the fence. I can go with it either way. I'll leave it up to the preponderance of opinions of the rest of the board about whether they want to proceed with this item.
Well, it sounds like you guys have been well versed. So it was just,
How about if we decide not to do this, I'll invite you over and we can have over to our shop and
I would love that.
and we'll do a one-on-one training, or any of the
Yeah.
other trustees for that matter, as long as it's
Yeah.
not more than half of us, I guess.
Well, and maybe
Um,
Charlie.
Yeah, if you guys are interested, I'll arrange for something, a lunch meeting or something to that effect.
That would be great.
Where we can go over that.
Yeah, because I'd like to know how the county is protected.
I can tell you this, that we do our absolute best, but there is no such thing as no risk.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
And from a trustee perspective, beyond what the county does to keep the county system safe, MSARA has a pension administration system that is not hosted by the county, but is hosted by our vendor. Now, we do our own due diligence, asking for what's referred to as a SOC report, a SOC 2 report, that is essentially an outside firm that they hire that comes in and reviews their protocols and practices and what they're doing to ensure that they're safeguarding our data to the best extent possible. As Trustee Land said, there's no guarantee that you're not going to, run into a bad actor or something that couldn't be exploited. But we do get those types of reports from our vendors on an annual basis. Okay. But of course, the county could not speak to what our other vendors do, and they also have access to a lot of, our member data.
Well, we also, when I came on the board, all of our member data was in one place. And now we have a duplicate site as well, thinking if there's some sort of a disaster, an earthquake, whatever, how can we be sure that our retirees are going to get their paychecks?
So we actually do have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, and in addition to our processes, we ensure that our software vendor has their business disaster recovery plan, and we test functions of that every year. In the event that, let's say, MSARA building is destroyed or our staff is hit by a pandemic or whatever, we do have ways that if we contact our vendor, they can run certain processes on our behalf and ensure that our trustees or not our trustees, but our members are paid, down to the point that they can actually print checks for us if it comes down to it and is necessary. And we have tested that and confirm with the bank that, the MICR alignment and everything is correct. So we test different aspects on a rolling basis to ensure that they can step in and process for us, in addition to maintaining our own disaster recovery as far as alternate worksite locations and how to provide coverage if we're short staffing and things of that nature.
I think my concern last month when I mentioned this was that I just heard the 60-minute segment that talked about Chinese putting malware in all of our utilities, and it was just sitting there. And then my concern was, what happens if our electric system goes down? How, we've got people out there who would get no paycheck unless it could be sent from.
And there are certain things that we can't necessarily test for. If a chunk of the U.S. electrical grid it goes down, we may not be able to transmit a bank file, or even if we were able to transmit it to the clearinghouse, other banks may not be able to receive it if they were in an impacted area, if the electrical grid was down. If there's a widespread power outage, those things, the impact may not be ascertainable until you know how large that is. Would it prevent the post office from posting our mail and being able to deliver checks? Would it impact the direct deposits? And it may depend on the region of the retiree, where some folks would be impacted and others would not be. Whether it's an electrical grid failure or a big fire that we did experience here, 4 or 5 years ago. Well, I guess it was 6 years ago, but
2017.
So I'm more than willing to let that go.
DR, disaster recovery, is a subset of cybersecurity. It's part of the overall discussion. It is a different discussion, and we don't necessarily have to target county policies or county procedures for the offsite. I mean, if the board is interested in being educated as to what DR, things we've done, you can do that. Some of what you have done is beyond what we have done in terms of dealing with LRS,
right,
and of having a backup for check printing and all that.
We can certainly provide more information or a little educational piece that goes into more detail on our disaster recovery. And one of the items I have on my list of potential work items for the board to consider is whether the board wants to create a business continuity or disaster recovery for trustees action. If our site's not available or there's other issues, how would this board actually function? We have plans on how to get staff to function, but I don't think we've ever expanded that to include how we would ensure that the board could operate. Although the pandemic was a good example of using an alternate technology to facilitate the meetings when we couldn't get together in public. So again, we have some things that we can extrapolate from, but we don't have a written process for board, business continuity.
But board business continuity wouldn't stop the checks from going out, and the information that each retiree has that's in the system. And so I really think this is just something that I'm interested in.
And I'd be happy to meet one-on-one with you and answer specific questions that you might have, or bring something back to the board if there is more interest on a specific area or topic there.
Okay, so consider my question not as far as the topics. That I will pull that back, and I'll meet with you, Doris and Alex, maybe afterwards with you. And we'll see if Charlie is interested as well.
Sure. So does that mean that we want to probably wind down item 8?
Yeah, I'll strike cybersecurity. If there's any feedback on the selection of case studies or on the topic for the actuary, I'd be happy to hear those. Or if there's any other requests from the board to either add something or remove something.
So what were our options on the Siegel presentation? You said there was this one and one other. What was?
They could do a presentation on understanding your plan's funding policy.
Ooh, I like both of those.
And if they're coming, we could probably ask them to do both. I mean,
It's a part of this whole business that I, for whatever reason, have always had the most interest in. Personally, it doesn't mean that it's.
but I just would like
Everyone else's.
some direction from the board that will help me finalize things with presenters we wish to bring in to speak with you. So if there's another topic or something you'd like to hear from, let me know so I can work on getting that included. Again, once these topics get set, I can specifically let Callan and Siegel or any other presenters know what and make sure that they have sufficient time. And both Siegel and Callan had committed to coming up in person to the meeting in Willits, so they won't be attending virtually like they did last time when we did our strategic planning offsite, which was still towards the end of the pandemic, I think. But this time I do expect to have them in person, so it would give you an opportunity to hear directly from them and ask more questions. Sometimes it's a little hard on the virtual ones to always have that interaction.
Okay, does anybody have any items that they wanted to put forward, any topics? What's the latest that we can suggest topics to amend this?
I would certainly like something within a week, so I can be sure to wrap this up and confirm with the presenters who will be attending so they can make sure they have staff available. I know Siegel has a conflict on the day of our offsite. They have to be at another system to do a presentation, so they might be looking at splitting their staff up so somebody could come to our meeting, or maybe pushing their presentation maybe to a little later in the day so they could do something else first, or vice versa. So I just want to have sufficient time that they can build that into their plans and make sure they're prepared.
Okay, I would think that there might be ideas that spring forth from the SACRS meeting.
Okay.
And so if we have a week, it sounds like if we could have a little bit more than a week, maybe a week from Friday.
Yeah, if you could get back to me by like Monday the 17th or Tuesday the 18th, that would be enough time for me still to rework this and then reach out to the presenters with a finalized topic.
Are there any other thoughts?
So I sort of always think about this as a topic of education. I wonder on trustee thoughts about, how to review or move through a large document. Right, you've got a 100-page document. Maybe not every page you need to get through. Maybe there's 10 or 15 pages that you look through. So just as a topic that we don't have here, maybe we could walk through how to review different large documents, anything from the audit report, an actuary report,
Our ACFR.
the ACFR, the investment reports. I don't, just as a general topic, I wondered.
Don't you realize we read every single word, read every column?
Yeah. It's hard to remember it all,
Right.
So I just kind of throw that out there as a topic. Is that less interesting than some of the topics Doris suggested as a supplementary
I think that'd be really useful.
topic?
Okay, and we may do that outside of the February meeting, or maybe we do it as part of the February meeting. We'll just look and see where that fits in. There were a couple of other topics on this draft agenda that I hadn't specifically called out. I know in the past people had asked sort of how we compare to other California plans, so I do have maybe a few minutes set aside on the agenda to go through Chiron's interactive tool on California plans, so you can kind of see where we sit compared to other plans. The other one was, I think from our discussion last month on the delegation of authority, what authority has the board delegated to whom, and what authority the board has retained. So those are the only two other items that were on the draft agenda, and I will wait until the 18th, which I believe is Tuesday, to see if there's any follow-up as far as suggestions or presenters. Did you have a comment?
No.
Okay.
Can we put Trustee Cromer under the spotlight and say if there was just one broad topic that you think would be good for the board to review in an education
Or a new
setting?
trustee?
Yeah, I think I gave some direction to executive director last meeting and said, hey, some retraining on some of those original items you go over as a new trustee, I think, and retraining on those periodically throughout your career as a trustee would be beneficial.
Good idea.
Because ours was sort of a shotgun blast when I joined, and I know it's much more organized now, but I'm positive, as I reflect today, that there would be benefit in me to attend the entire training with Doris again.
And there
But
was
just
none.
breaking it down into digestible format and periodically reviewing some of that training material, I think would be very beneficial.
One approach to address that might be just throughout the year, pick a topic or two, and then you get the credit for it, and we don't have to do a 8-hour at once, but, maybe disability retirement or Brown Act or investments, or just take pieces of it.
John loved doing 8 hours at once. He told me he wouldn't do it any other way.
It was thrilling every.
He left, his eyes were glazed over and not even pointing the same
480
direction.
minutes, I was.
It's a lot to
Reading every
digest.
word.
No, I appreciate that, and I think those are both good suggestions that we can pick out some of those new trustee topics that we touch on and actually present it at a little piece at a board meeting, on and off throughout the year. So it's just a nice refresher for trustees.
And to show how long I've been around, there was none when I came on the board.
It was a whole figure it out moment, wasn't it?
It absolutely was.
Wow.
Well, I had a little prior experience.
Yeah, you did.
A lot.
Okay, so it sounds like we have exhausted that item, and we like what we're seeing on the agenda. We're going to have a little bit of time to add some more stuff if we want, and we're scratching the cybersecurity.
Yep.
That's it. Is there any? I'm assuming we've gone through board discussion. So is there any public comment on this item? There is none. That brings us to yes.
We got to dismiss?
We've got 3 more items.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question on one of them, so go ahead.
Okay, so that brings us to item number 9, administrative report.
Okay, that wasn't general board discussion. That's
Thank you, Chair Land. The administrative report includes a couple of reminders. There's an audit committee meeting on Wednesday, November 19th at 1 p.m. Also, our fiduciary insurance policy is renewing at the end of this month, so trustees who want to be covered need to make the $10 payment for the premium on the waiver of recourse to be covered under the rider extension on that policy. By the January meeting, you can bring it by check preferred to the December or January meeting. We will be holding a board special election. The individual who ran and was elected to the safety seat to start term December 1st, something has come up and he is actually leaving county employment and retiring. He is not going to serve as an elected trustee, so we will be sending out, with the board's approval after today's meeting, a declaration of election, a notice of election and declaration of candidacy period opening up. We would expect, based on the timeline provided in the board packet, that the election would be held February 2nd and would be, the trustee would be in place by the March meeting. We would still strongly encourage them to attend the off-site, even though they may not be a voting member at that point as a trustee-elect. We filled our retirement accountant position. Our new accountant, Chris Anton, starts on Monday the 10th, and we're excited to have Chris joining us. I'm sure Robert's even more excited than I am. Also, we decided to follow the county executive office as far as winter closures, and our office will be closed to the public on the dates listed in the administrative report, which does include slightly over the entire week from December 24th through January 2nd. Staff will be working, at least some staff, during that time, but we will be closed to the public.
Okay, I believe that's, is there any discussion on any of the items that have been brought forward here? Okay. That's the end of the administrative report. No public comment, I'm assuming. But I'm asking for it. We're not getting it.
None.
Okay, that brings us to item 10, general board discussion. And are there any items that...
One quick one. I don't know where I saw it. It was late last night, but Orange County board members are paid $320 a day for their meetings.
I would have to check that. I'm unaware. I believe there are some capacity for systems to modify the stipend, and it may depend on the area of the state.
Or the length of the board meetings, maybe. I just assumed everybody else got $100 a meeting.
Fresno, I know, was the $100 a meeting. I don't know what OSERS is, but I'd be happy to look into it.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
I did actually notice that. There is a stipend paid to some people, some trustees. I think I sent you a chat on that as well.
Yeah, trustees who are appointed and not the elected or county employees, but the appointed trustees are eligible to receive a stipend for attending. Employee members obviously are being paid your wage to attend. So.
All right, I just...
If I can, I just, obviously this will be my last comments and thoughts as a trustee, and I really want to express my gratitude and appreciation for the MCR staff. The previous and current employees are extremely dedicated and great at what they do, and I just want to express to anyone watching that we're in great hands. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Quincy.
Yeah, and I did, have a few other words to say. Obviously, we did the proclamation, but, thanks for being as professional as you've been and just being on the board. It's been great to have you here. It's going to be different without you. When I am the chair of these meetings, I always think back to how you ran these meetings, and that's what I try to do, it as good as you handled it. I have not reached that.
I think you're doing great.
Yeah, we all do, Alex.
On that subject, I believe we do need volunteers for next year. So I'm hoping everybody is thinking about how much they would like to volunteer and serve as chair, vice, or secretary into the next year.
You are allowed to serve in a board office 2 years in a row if you want.
I know, and I did notice that Quincy had done that. And I think I told you last year that I would be willing to do that. I'm less willing to do it now than I was last year. But I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I can absolutely guarantee you I will not do it 3 years in a row. So if we can, bring another volunteer in, and we'll need to have one for next year. I think there could be a danger of a board taking on too much of the personality of the person who's chairing it if they were to do it multiple years in a row. And that would be really dangerous in my case.
It is, you're right. You're right.
So I don't have anything else on that. Just, hopefully, we do have some people out today. Lenore was the vice, right? And so,
yes.
Yeah. So, hopefully maybe will be wanting to step up.
That brings up an interesting comment just to mention, most of the other serial systems do not allow their alternates to serve
As
as
chair.
in-board officer roles. Now, we have not ever had that restriction, and I don't necessarily see why it would be. But do you see any reason, Jeff, that an alternate couldn't serve as an officer?
I don't think there's a legal preclusion that I'm aware of. It's kind of interesting that they may lead a discussion and then not be able to vote on the item, but that's not determinative. But, yeah, I don't know what the practice of other systems is. Maybe I'll
It was
ask
like
next week.
15 to 5, like 4 or 5 of us allow an alternate to serve in a board
Yeah, I think you
office.
can.
But most of them prohibit it in their own bylaws, not by the serial, but I don't. And some of them said that that was based on a recommendation from their council, but there doesn't, even like, I believe LA allows it, and some of the other systems, but there's a number of systems that said they don't, but there seems to be a differing opinion on whether or not it's permitted or whether it's best practice, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Okay, are there any other items that, for general board discussion? Seeing none, that'll move us to item number 11, adjournment and notice of next Board of Retirement meeting. The next Board of Retirement meeting will be held in the Mendocino County Employees Retirement Association Boardroom, 625B Kings Court, Ukiah, California, on Wednesday, December 17th, 2025, at 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much. Did a great job.
Appreciate it, Jeff.
Adjourned. I do, and I'll
We
probably use it.
might interact more now with
That's right.
some of that
Now
visibility
you can
stuff.
take that cap off.
It's like, hey, I can't fill this questionnaire out because I'm going to vote on it. I'll fill it out now for you, Jeff.
We're really gonna miss you, Quincy.
I appreciate it.
You can always run again in the future.
I'd like to say, what am I going to do with all the time, but I'm